We are finally doing it. I have pulled out all of my ColourPop palettes and ranked them. Whew, so this is gonna be a long video. Hi, my name is Thorn if you're new here. If you're not new and you're returning, you are amazing and I appreciate you. If you are new, if you could hit that subscribe button, I'd really appreciate it. We are so close to 700 subscribers. It would mean everything to me if you subscribed. Now, today we are ranking my ColourPop palettes. And I knew I had a lot. I knew. But I didn't realize how many I actually had. So we will be ranking 50 of my palettes. There's more. You just can't see them. Now, there's a handful of palettes that I pulled out and put to the side because I didn't feel like I'd really played enough with them to really rate them on any sort of level. And some of the ones on here are probably not going to look as used as some of the others because the ones that I use in my personal life, I kind of go in with a pretty light hand and I might not even go into every color in the palette. Just a couple favorites. That's what I find myself doing a lot with ColourPop. So some of them are going to look relatively unused, but I promise these have all been tried out and tested and put on my face at some point. So we're going to talk about them. 50. Here we go. So we're going to start 10 at a time because I think that's the easiest way to do this so I don't drop any. I've done that before and I'm not proud of it, but I've done it. Now I do have to say this is just based on my personal preference, but I like in a palette. So my ranking might be completely different than your ranking. My least favorite might be your most favorites. Please don't take anything to heart. The beautiful thing about makeup is that everyone can love something different. But this is just me ranking based on my personal preferences, what I tend to reach for, and performance. So let's get into this. Number 50, we are talking about the Matte About Hue palette. And this is an all matte rainbow palette, and I hated this palette. I did a couple looks with it and I could not get it to work for me. I just found it was really hard to layer these colors on each other. It just made me upset. So yeah, that's why this little guy is number 50. Number 49, we have another all matte palette. This is the Gone Matte palette. And this one is a little bit better than the Matte About Hue. But again, it's all matte. And for my personal preference, oh, and cat hair. For my personal preference, I can't deal with all matte palettes. It's just not my jam. I do not like them. So this guy is ranking at 49. 48. This is an old one. This is the Aura and Out palette. And when it first came out, I thought it was cute. And I never use it. I think I've used it twice. And I just like did not like the looks that I did. I was kind of disappointed with the way all the colors worked together. And also the color just didn't look great on me. So this was just not a great color story for me personally. It just wasn't for me. Number 47. Now I have all of the Hocus Pocus palettes. This is the Hocus Pocus 2 palette. And this is what the outside looks like. And inside, this is what it looks like. Now, it's not a terrible palette, but I just have so many ColourPop palettes that perform better that this was a disappointment, especially this purple. It's just not a very good purple. I know ColourPop can do better. I know ColourPop can do better collabs. So it was just like a little bit of a disappointment for me. So that's why this one is ranked at number 47. Number 46, we have the Lucky Penny palette. This is what this guy looks like. And I thought I was gonna love this. I thought this was gonna be a great neutral palette for me, but it just leans a little bit too warm for what I like. So I never reach for it. ColourPop has a lot of neutral palettes, so this one was just not necessary in my collection. Number 45, this is actually a new palette from this year, Valentine's Day, I think, the Valentine's Day collection, and this is the Flirty Talk palette. And again, this one is just rated really low because it's not a color story that I find myself reaching for. I feel like the reds are a little bit repetitive, and even though they worked really well and the Super Shock has a big old dent in it for me digging into it, it's just not a color story that I reach for ever. Therefore, I had to rank it down pretty low. But I mean, it does fit the Valentine's Day theme, so it fits the theme really well. Number 44. Now, I am a Disney adult, so I love all the Disney collabs they come out with. But this I just feel like wasn't up to par. And that's the Misunderstood palette. This is the Villains palette. And this is what it looks like. And the reason why I rank this one a little bit lower is, again, for me, purples are important because I wear purples a lot. And this purple just was not it. So it was a little disappointing. Most of the other colors worked okay. The green wasn't quite as dark as I would have liked it to be. It's a little lighter than how it appears in the pan, so a little disappointing there, but I don't know. I just like that purple. Just throws me off every time. I just like a good purple, and this one just wasn't it. Number 43, we have another collab palette. This is the Legend of Korra palette, and it was okay. It was okay. I did a whole video going over this palette, and I thought like all the colors worked pretty well, but it just is not a very exciting palette. It's kind of boring. So that's why it's ranked a little bit lower. I want something a little more exciting, you know, and this just didn't excite me. Like I could pull off some pretty looks with it, but it just is kind of like, whatever, you know, it's in my collection. I don't know how often I'm going to be pulling it out. Number 42, we have another collab palette. This is the ColourPop and the Powerpuff Girls palette. And I used to love watching the Powerpuff Girls. I just thought they were the best. This is what the palette looks like. I feel like it, again, is very on theme for what they're doing, but it's not a color story that really speaks to me. I don't reach for this palette very often. It's got a pressed glitter in it and another pressed glitter. It's got 2 pressed glitters in it, and I do not use pressed glitters. I saw one video where someone got a piece of glitter stuck in their eye, and I will never. So it's just not a color story that I reach for a lot. It just doesn't really speak to me, so I tend to forget about it in my collection. So again, while they did a good job being on theme, it's just not a theme that personally speaks to me color-wise. 41, I think this one came out this year too. This is the Not a Box of Chocolates palette, and this is a pretty decent neutral palette, but I think the reason why I rated this one so low is because it's a little dark for my color taste. I do like a neutral palette. You're gonna see some neutral palettes rated higher up, but this one is just a little too dark for what I personally like to do when I'm doing a more neutral look. Everything performs really well. I think it is a good palette. It's just not one that I think I would be reaching for a lot, so therefore it is number 41. On to number 40, we have the Blow and Smoke palette. This is like an OG palette, I'm pretty sure. It is old. And the reason why this one is ranked so low is, again, a lot of this is just based on my personal preference. I don't do smoky eyes. I feel like really dark colors tend to age me quite a bit, so I stay away from really dark colors like this. I feel like this palette performed super, super well, and I do like bringing it out every once in a while to use Starstruck, but it's not a palette that I reach for very often, therefore it's a little bit lower. Number 39, we have the Lush palette. Now, what's funny is that this is totally my color story. I absolutely love this color story, but I don't feel like the shadows in this palette perform as well as some of their other palettes. So it's not one that I tend to reach for very often. That green is pretty nice, but it's not their best green. There are better greens out there. So since I know that, it's hard for me to want to reach for this one. It's beautiful, and I do like the tropical vibes I get from it. Like, I love the packaging. The packaging on it is pretty great, but it's just not one that I find myself reaching for. There are better colorful palettes that ColourPop has come out with. 38. So I talk a lot about their large palettes because I think they have some of their best formulas. So it's kind of funny that the Smoke and Roses palette is rated pretty low on my list. Now, it's not a bad palette, but again, it's just not my color story. It's too pink. It's so pink. I do wish they had some purples in here. I would have loved to see more purples in here. I get what they're doing though. You know, there's somebody out there, there's probably a lot of somebodies out here that love this color story. It's just not a color story I reach for. But like any other of the big palettes, it performs really well. So every once in a while, I'll pull it out. There's a couple colors that I like. The pink ones are very pretty. The pink shimmers, it's a great formula. It's just not a color that I reach for very often, so it gets neglected. I do need to pull this guy out again. Number 37. This is not a palette I use anymore. I don't really use it very often when I first got it either, but it's a classic, and I think it's rated so high because I love the theme of it. So this is the collab they did with Zoella. This is the Brunch Date palette. This is an old palette, but I love brunch. And it's basically a neutral palette with a pop of blue. Remember when every company was doing that? Like just a neutral palette, pop of something. Well, yeah, ColourPop definitely does that quite frequently. And this is kind of a key example. Now, all the colors work great. I don't think I used that blue like once maybe, but I definitely went for the neutral. So it is a more neutral palette, but it's so cute. It's so different and it's so fun. So this palette just makes me happy. I'll probably never get rid of this palette for nostalgic reasons, but it performed really well too. So it's a good neutral palette with a pop of blue. 36, we have the Troublemaker palette. Now, this was actually a really big disappointment to me because I loved this grungy purple color story. I thought it was so pretty, but when I used it, I found the mattes to be absolutely terrible. The shimmers are really, really pretty. This Villain Era, such a pretty silver, oh my gosh. But the mattes are absolutely bonkers bad. They're not good. I didn't really get it to work for me, but I love the shimmers enough that I'm debating what to do with this palette. Do I keep it? Do I let it go in my next eyeshadow declutter? I don't know. So I'm going to continue to play with it, but I will say it's such a beautiful color story. So if those mattes had performed better, it definitely would have ranked higher, but they just don't. They're not great. At number 35, we have the Mandalorian palette. So this is one of their Star Wars collab palettes, and it's actually pretty good. I think it's rated this low because it's not a color story that I reach for very often, but I did find all the colors in here worked really well. Even this mustard yellow, which I'm not really a huge yellow fan, but that mustard yellow works really well. And because it works well, it makes me want to use it more, you know? All the shimmers performed well, but again, it's just rated a little lower because it's just not super unique, you know? It's just, I think it fits this theme. I think like, yeah, it fits Mandalorian, but it's just a little basic and boring. It's not bad though. It's a good palette. It's just not super exciting. I don't get excited over it. Number 34. God, I hope I'm keeping track of these numbers right. If I'm not, I'm sorry. Counting is not my jam. And yes, I am in accounting. Okay, so number 34, we have another collab with Disney. This is the Midnight Masquerade palette. Now, this is a good palette. I don't really have too many complaints, but the pressed glitters. The pressed glitters just bum me out because I do not use them. But I thought this was a really pretty color story. I feel like you could create a lot of beautiful looks with this, and I have no problem with it, but I just don't love pressed glitters. So it's hard when you can't use two of the colors in the palette. Also, I didn't love the layout of this. I just felt like there is quite a bit of empty space. Maybe it's just me, but I just feel like they could have done something a little different with the layout. So it's a good palette. It's really pretty artistry, but yeah, the layout bugs me. Number 33, we have the That's Taupe palette. Now, this is a great neutral palette, and the only reason it's rated this low is because there's another neutral palette that is so high on my ranking that just blows everything else out of the water. You'll see what it is later. But this is a great neutral palette. I have no complaints. It's great to travel with if you're looking for something where it's a little more neutral, you know? This is very neutral, but it's very pretty, but it works really well. But I don't have a lot to say about it because it is just a neutral palette. Number 32, we have the collab with the Nightmare Before Christmas palette. And I really like this palette actually. We're kind of getting into ones that I really like. But I thought this palette performed really, really well. People were really upset when they first released this palette because they were like, what is that color story? That does not scream Nightmare Before Christmas. And maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, and not really. It doesn't really scream it to me, but everything performed really well. And it's like a heavy palette. Like I like when they have a little bit of weight to them. And I just thought they did a good job with this collab. So I'm a fan of this palette. Everything performs really well. The pinks are actually fantastic. So it's a fun palette. Number 31, an oldie but a goodie. We have the Mar palette. I think this is one of my oldest palettes with ColourPop because when I saw this come out, I had to get my hands on it. It is a beautiful color story. I absolutely love this palette. When it first came out, I think was very unique for what it was. You didn't see a lot of bright, colorful color stories like this. Since it has come out, there's been so many fantastic palettes that ColourPop has come out with, so it's hard for me to rank this one higher because I don't reach for it very much anymore. There's just so much. but it is a great palette, and I love this palette. On to number 30. We have the Dreams Come True palette, which is the Snow White palette they came out with in collaboration with Disney. I have a video up on this one as well, and it is a beautiful palette. I think the colors are perfect for the theme. They're totally on point for Snow White, and everything performed beautifully. But it's not a color story that I love. Again, it's like I don't reach for reds a whole lot, and I definitely don't reach for this like very pretty royal blue very often. So it wasn't a color story that really spoke to me, but I rank it higher because look at the packaging. It's beautiful. They did a great job with this. So it's really pretty, everything works well, but color story is just not my 100% favorite. It's kind of the same with the next one. So number 29, we have the Sailor Moon and ColourPop collab palette. And I had to get this because I thought the graphic on the front was so cool. But again, it performs beautifully. This is a beautiful palette, but it's not a color story I reach for very often. These more muted tones are just not really my thing. I like bright, and you're gonna see a lot of brighter palettes coming up. So it's a great palette. I think, again, they did a great job with the packaging, but it's not one that I reach for very often. But now that I'm looking at it, I kind of feel like I need to dig this out more. It's pretty, but it's just not one that the color story speaks to me. Number 28, we have the Baroque palette. Now this was on the chopping block quite a few times, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna use it a ton. I'm gonna decide if I like it, and ultimately I do like it. But again, if you can tell, it's a very dark color story, so it's not one that I reach for very often, but the shadows perform so well, and when I do want something dark, this is normally the palette I reach for. Everything just performs so well. It's easy to blend things together. It's a good palette, and it's really pretty. Again, like sometimes ColourPop can just hit it out of the park with this packaging. So pretty. Number 27, we have the At For A Sight palette. This is the collab they did with Raw Beauty Kristi. Now, ooh, look how pretty this palette is. Again, everything from the packaging to the color story is beautiful on here. But again, it is a little bit darker. So most of these colors just pull pretty dark on me, and I don't reach for it a lot because of that. But everything performs well, and it's so pretty. Number 26, we have the California Love palette. This is a great neutral palette, and fortunately it does have a pressed glitter, which is always a bummer. And it is a little warm for me, but everything performs so well. And I find myself reaching for just a couple of the colors in this palette. It's kind of like these 6 I normally go for, and I can always create a look I'm really happy with. So this is a palette that I've traveled with before, and I am a California girl, so I love the theme. So yeah, this one's coming in at number 26. I'm gonna mess up on these numbers so bad. I already know. Number 25, we have the Fade Into Hue palette. This is a gorgeous rainbow palette, but it is a rainbow palette, which, you know, we have quite a few of those in the collection. There are a couple colors though that make this so unique. Ignore the pressed glitters because they have quite a few of them in there. But this Hot Copic color is stunning. It's absolutely stunning. Hot, also a stunning color. They just have some great shimmers in here. So it does bum me out that there's so many pressed glitters. I think they finally kind of heard people and they've stopped putting pressed glitters and things, but you know, it's always a bummer when you have a palette with a bunch of pressed glitters. But this is an excellent rainbow palette if you're in the market for one. I think they still have this one online, I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, it's a good palette. Number 24, this is actually a fantastic palette. This is the Bare Necessities palette, and obviously it's neutral, but it's that great formula that these large palettes have that I absolutely love. This is another great palette to travel with because it's, I mean, you can make so many different looks. They're all gonna be neutral though, but if that's what you're in the mood for, this is a good palette. Number 23, we have the Star Wars palette. This is a good palette. This is what it looks like, and I found all the colors to work really, really well, and it's fun. They have these cool little like tie-dye, I think they're both Super Shocks, and they just perform so well. It's just a fun palette. I get a little bit nostalgic for Star Wars because I watched it a lot with, you know, my brother and my dad growing up, so it's a little bit of nostalgia creeping in there for sure, but it's just a good palette. It performs really well. The Silver Kessel Run, so good. I feel like I've been talking a lot about silvers lately. I've been on a little bit of a silver streak, but it's just a beautiful palette. Everything performs well. It's fun. I like it. Number 22. This is an old one. This is the Through My Eyes palette. This is the collab they did with Sarah E. way back in the day. Way back in the day. And the reason why this is rated so highly is because it is a fantastic palette. Everything performs well. I haven't pulled it out in quite a while though, but the greens are so good. The greens in this corner are absolutely fantastic. It's just a very beautiful jewel toned palette that is also a little bit neutral. You know, you can go neutral, you can go a little brighter. It's just, I like it. I like this one quite a bit. Number 21, we have the third collaboration with Hocus Pocus. This is the Witching Hour palette. And the reason why this one is rated a little bit higher is I just liked how it performed better. So I just felt like these colors spoke to me a little bit more. Like I got more use out of this palette than the other ones, and the purples were better. So that counts for a lot for me. Okay, we are on to the top 20. Whew. I feel like I've been talking a lot. At number 20, I have the collab they did with the Winx Club. So this is the Just Like Magic palette. And what's interesting is that this is not my color story. It's really not. This is not a color story that I would normally go for. But the reason why it's rated so high is because it performs so well. This like is a formula on a whole nother level. It just works well. It's a beautiful palette. I adore every single look that I make with it. So yeah, they just like really did a great job with the formula on this one. So I really love it. Number 19, we have the Star Wars Mandalorian palette.
Nope, I've been talking too long. That is the Child palette.
Now, this is my color story. Give me all the greens. Give me all the muddy greens, sage greens. Give me the greens. It's a fantastic palette and it's so cute. It's so cute. But the new generation of Star Wars doesn't speak to me quite as much as the older generation. So it's not so much a nostalgic thing. It's just that I like this palette. It's a good palette. Number 18, we have It's a Mood. Once again, I have to reiterate how much I love the formula in the big palettes. I just think they really give it their all in the bigger palettes for some reason. I don't know why, but the formula in this one is absolutely fantastic. It's jewel toned. It runs a little deeper jewel tones than some of the other palettes I have, which there's plenty of opportunity for me to use this. It's a good fall palette, I feel. I don't use it a whole lot in the summer, but it's just a beautiful palette. Everything works well. We do have some pressed glitters. This palette is definitely older, you can tell, because some of the pressed glitters are shrinking up on themselves. I've noticed they do that. So it is getting a little bit old, but it's still a beautiful palette. It still brings me a whole lot of joy when I use it. So good palette. Number 17, we have the Dream Street palette. This is the collab they did with Kathleen Light, so it's very old. And this palette is literally rated this high because I'm obsessed with Mermaid Boy. It is a great color. Do they sell it as a single? I don't know if they do, but if they do, you should get it because it's beautiful. It's also just a well-performing palette. It is a neutral palette with a couple pops of green, right? I think we can kind of all agree that it is a little more on the neutral leaning side. But when I first got it, I was kind of starting out on my makeup journey. And this palette helped me expand into some different colors that I wasn't quite used to. I had this Stila palette, so old, and it was just all very neutral. I would put my finger into one color, put that color in my eye, call it a day. So this palette helped me branch out a little more, and it's just a good palette. It's a really good palette. Number 16, we have the It's All Good palette, another of their large palettes. And this one I definitely dropped on the floor at one point and rearranged everything. So this is not what it originally looks like. It's a little bit all over the place, but that's okay because it's still beautiful. And yeah, we know why this one's rated high, right? The purples. The purples are fantastic. I'm a huge purple fan. Purples and greens are totally my jam. So the fact that they have a palette where they have all these beautiful purples, it's always going to rank high for me. So it also has a good mix of like some neutrals, some golds, which is another great color that I love. So yeah, it's a fantastic palette. Are you sick of me saying that yet? 15, we have the new Bon Voyage palette. This is the collaboration they did with B221, which I was not super familiar with. I looked into it a little bit, but I really like this palette. I think this color, Gotta Dance, is so much fun. Sometimes they put these really unique, pretty colors that I wouldn't think that I would love, that I end up loving, and I'm like, what is that? But this is just a great palette for summer. You might see this one in my upcoming best palettes of summer ranking video. Words. Because I just think this really embodies summer. It's got the bright colors, it's got a couple neutrals if you want to play with the neutrals, it's got some lighter shimmers if you want to go lighter. It's just like, it's a good palette, and you can't really go too dark with this palette. I mean, they have some darker colors. They have like one darker color. Everything leans more bright and light, and it's just good for summer. It's a fun palette. Number 14, I just did a review on this palette. This is the Lost in Wonderland palette. It's Alice in Wonderland theme, and I actually brought this with me when I went to San Diego recently. It's just a fun palette. Again, I like the fun bright colors. It's not as bright as I would have liked. I like super bright colors, but it performs, again, so well. And this color, Lose Something, it's just really fun. You kind of have to use your finger for it. It is a super shock color, so it's a little harder to use. But they've got this super shock, they've got this super shock, and they just perform so well. And I think the real cherry on top is this green, Stark Raving Mad. I was shocked. I wasn't expecting very much out of it because this color green can kind of go one of two ways. It either is really deep or it's really sheer. And in this instance, it actually looks exactly like it looks on the pan on your eyes, which I love. More of that, please. Number 13. This is fitting because the Barbie movie is about to come out. Yeah, I don't think it's come out yet. It's about to come out. But this is the Malibu Barbie palette that ColourPop came out with. And the reason why this one's rated so high is because I was shocked at the way it performs. I was actually shocked that people weren't as excited about it as I was, because the pinks on here perform so well. Now, I know I've talked about not liking pinks, but the one exception to that is a bright pink. I do like a bright pink. I think you can do so many fun things with it. And that's how I feel about this palette. You can do so many fun things with this palette. It's another palette that really, I feel like, embodies summer. And it's so good. It's so good. They need to talk about this one more. Number 12, we have the You're Golden palette. Now, this is more on the neutral side as well, but I've gotten so much use out of this palette. I just really, really like it. I think it performs beautifully. We do have a pressed glitter in there, unfortunately, and it's a pretty one too, but I don't use that one. But I've used everything else in this palette. I've traveled with this palette. I really like it. It's a good neutral palette with, I mean, barely some pops of color. Definitely is more of a neutral palette, but I just like the looks that I can do with this. So yeah, it's a good palette. It's a good neutral palette. Number 11, we have another oldie. This is the So Jaded palette. This is another collab they did with Kathleen Lights way back in the day. And this is definitely my color story. So all the bright jewel tones are so beautiful. We've got enough neutrals so that you can go either light or dark, whatever you're kind of feeling like. It's just a fun palette. Again, points are taken off for those pressed glitters in there. I do not touch them, but this is a fun palette. The purples are deep and pretty. I love them. The greens are gorgeous. It's a good, fantastic palette. They need to bring this one back. If it's not available anymore, I feel like this one they definitely need to bring back because it is gorgeous. Okay, we are on to the top 10. This was a lot of palettes. My God. Okay, but these, after going through everything, I just feel like are the top 10. They really are. So coming in at number 10, we have the Or Kid You Not. Now, I've talked about how much I love purple. This should not come as a surprise. This is not even the only purple palette in the top 10, but this is a slightly deeper purple palette. There's a time and place for this, and it is every time and every place. It is a beautiful palette, and it performs so well. I think their 9-pan palettes are also some of the best formulas out there. It's just, they put a lot of effort into this one. I feel like in the formula, in the color story, everything works so well together. It's just a fantastic palette. I love this one. Coming in at number 9. Okay, maybe this is the third Hocus Pocus collab palette. I lost track already. Oh my God, this is harder than it looks, people. Okay, so this is the Hocus Pocus Gather Round Sisters palette. And I feel like this is the one that like crashed their site and that it was down. It like delayed the launch by like a day. It was infuriating, but they got there together after that instance. So this is a beautiful color story. I love this color story. I like that it's dark. I like that it's grungy. I feel like it really fits the theme. It's very witchy. I like to pull this out around Halloween and just fall in general. It's a good fall palette and it performs really well. I love these grungy greens. You don't see a lot of grungy greens in ColourPop, I feel, but they have them in this palette and they work so well. And yeah, number 9 is the perfect spot for this guy. Number 8, this is actually what's on my eyes today. This is the Play It Jewel palette. So it's another one of their large palettes. And it is, I've talked about jewel tones before. This is jewel toned, obviously. And the purples that I used today are fantastic, if you could not tell. It is such a fantastic palette. It's a little bit older, so I was worried when I pulled it out today, but it still performs incredibly well. So I'm really happy about that. But all of the colors on here, I feel like you can wear by themselves or in tandem with something else. It's just a fun palette. I like the fun palettes. I like the fun colors. And I like when the formula is consistent throughout it. It's consistent. Everything is good. And there's no pressed glitters, so extra win there. I warned you that there's going to be another purple palette. So coming at number 7, we have the It's My Pleasure palette. This one's rated a little higher than the Orchid You Not because it's a little bit lighter. So I do feel like I can use this a little more often in my day-to-day. Like I would wear this to work anytime, any day, because I just feel like it's beautiful. It's very springy. It's very light, it's very bright. It's just a great palette and it also really offsets my eyes. So it makes them pop. It's a fantastic palette. Again, I don't know which of these are available anymore. They do tend to bring back some older ones every now and again, but this is a great purple palette. So if it's not available, I hope they bring it back because the color story is just on point. Number 6, we actually have the Tinkerbell palette. This is another Disney palette and I thought this one was absolutely fantastic. A lot of greens, as you can tell. I've talked about liking greens. I like these greens. These greens are fantastic, and I like the green looks that I come up with. I like that they have a couple neutral browns in there, so you can kind of vary it up a little bit, but it's just, it shocked me how well this palette performed, because I thought the shimmers on here were out of this world. Beautiful palette, beautiful packaging. It's just, oh, sometimes they just, they make me so happy. This palette makes me happy. Number 5, we have another green palette. Wow, surprise. This is the Sage the Day palette. And this is what this guy looks like. It actually, I feel like we have a couple palettes that are similar to this one, but this is better. This is the best kind of more mossy green palette, at least in my opinion. And I just feel like this one looks really good on my face. I love it. It's fantastic. It's just, Sage the Day. It's just, it really does sage the day. Number 4, I talked about having a couple neutral palettes ranked really high. And number 4 is actually the Going Coconuts palette. This is one of my favorite neutral palettes that they've put out. It's popping out a little bit because I have traveled with this before. But it is one of my favorite neutral palettes. I feel like the tones here are just a little bit cooler. They work with my skin tone a little bit better than a lot of the other neutral palettes. And I just, everything, like, can't help but touch it. The shimmers are fantastic. You can wear the shimmers by themselves. You can basically put anything together and it works well in this palette. It's just a great neutral palette. It's kind of the perfect neutral palette for what I like. And again, I do like a little bit cooler toned, which is why I think this one speaks to me so much. Number 3, I talk about this one a lot, so it shouldn't be a surprise, but that is the Stone Cold Fox palette. This is a epic example of a fantastic neutral palette. Even though we just had Going Coconuts, this is probably my top favorite neutral palette because you get more colors, you have more variety. But again, it's a cooler toned neutral palette. So this is another one that I've traveled with quite a bit. I am so close to hitting pan in this color. I can smell it. I'm not there yet though. But I have just found that every color in here performs really well and I enjoy doing looks with this. This palette I will pull out if I have a colorful palette that I might want to pull some neutrals in this is a palette that I go to because I trust the neutrals. Everything performs beautifully. It's just kind of an epic palette. Like, if you're looking for a neutral palette, you can't go wrong with this one. You can't go wrong with going coconuts either if you're looking for something a little bit smaller. But these are definitely some of my top favorite neutral palettes in all my collection out of everything. Number 2. My mom bought this palette for me, so it's a little bit of nostalgia in there. But this is the High Tide palette, and it's not just nostalgia because look at it. It's so green. It is sea green. It is beautiful. All these colors perform well. The Must See in the middle, the shimmers are just amazing. That shimmer in particular is absolutely gorgeous. It's just another great performing green palette, and it's a different color story than a lot of the greens that I go for, but this one makes me so happy. It's just bright and vibrant, and it just, when you put it on your face, you're like, I look like a sea goddess, and I am down for that. It's a fantastic palette. I just love the color story though. It makes me happy. You know, that's the important thing I think about the palettes that I love. They have to make me happy when I see them. And that's why this one is number 1. Out of all the palettes that I have, all the ColourPop palettes specifically, this is the one I reach for the most. And this is the Aurora Struck palette. And it is absolutely gorgeous. These colors in here, this color story just speaks to me on so many levels. Every time I'm unsure of what ColourPop palette I want to play with, I normally just go for this one because there's so many options. The variety of colors is pretty spectacular, I have to say, and I'm always so happy with the look that I do. They actually just brought this one back. I don't know if it's still available, but I know they brought it back a couple weeks ago. It makes me happy. This collection came out with some highlighter sticks as well, which have been some of my favorite things ever. And this whole collection was just utter perfection. It was perfection, I will say. But all the colors just speak to me. The shimmers are beautiful. They have depth. I feel like you can create quite a range of looks with this palette. You have your deeper colors, you have your lighter colors. You can do whatever you want with this palette. It's a fantastic palette. And yeah, that's why it's number 1 in my collection. Now, I will say my rankings change on a yearly basis. So when I do this video again next year, things might change, but I can see the top 10 being pretty consistent because these are palettes that I love. They mean something to me. They make me outrageously happy when I play with them. And the looks that come out of them are just, I love them. I really, really do. So that was me ranking 50 of my ColourPop palettes. Again, there's a small stack of palettes that I just haven't played enough with to really rank. So they're not in here. Thank God. I don't want to rank anymore. 50 was enough. 50 was a lot. So we have gone through all 50. I want to hear from you guys. What are your favorite ColourPop palettes? What are the ones you hate? Because they've done some terrible palettes too. They can't all be perfect, right? But the palettes that I have that I love. They are flawless in my opinion. So I want to hear from you. Let me know in the comments down below what ColourPop palettes you've been loving lately. Please hit that subscribe button if you have a chance. I would really appreciate it. Again, we're so close to 700 subscribers and I need your help to get there. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm gonna go get a cough drop because my throat is sore, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!